Hi there, and welcome to another interview. Today, I've got the fabulous Heather Foley with me, and we're going to talk all things mental health. But firstly, I just want to say hi, Heather.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you very much for having me. Looking forward to the
That's,
chat.
that's okay. I mean, you absolutely were brilliant at the Carnivore conference. I loved your hour. Um, and afterwards, you said to me, you'd never spoken before in public like that. And you'd never have known. It was just amazing. But the content really did make me just want to get you on the channel and share you with all my viewers and all my 30,000 subscribers. So, Heather, if you could just give us a little introduction to who you are
Mhm.
and why we should listen to you, that'd be really great.
Thank you. Well, first off, I have to admit, before I went into the conference, I was terrified I was going to freeze when I saw the audience. So I appreciate those kind words. Thank you. So yes, I'm Heather Foley. I'm based in Scotland, in the north of the UK, and I am a physiotherapist, a musculoskeletal physiotherapist. I also do Ashtanga and Vinyasa flow yoga. I teach the two types. Um, I am doing EFT, emotional freedom technique, breath work through oxygen advantage. I do Reiki and meditation. And all these things I specifically learned for myself first and foremost over the years, and now I use them in my practice as a holistic therapist. So I'm bringing everything together. And relative to this space, I've done my training with Dr. Georgia Eid for mental health and ketogenic diet. And I'm currently doing my nutrition network pathway for medical professionals. So when I dive deep into stuff, and I need to be learning all the time, and I need to understand for myself. So I was originally an athlete. I did my main sport was triathlon, which is running, swimming, horse riding, and shooting. I also did tennis, hockey, golf, rock climbing very badly. I was terrified of heights, didn't work very well. And just generally, I was very athletic and very sporty. And I was also very prone to accidents. Over mainly from horse riding, I've had 10 concussions over the years. And to go back before that, I was actually within 10 days of being born, I had chicken pox. And at the age of about 5, I had my tonsils removed. And at the age of about 13, I had my appendix removed and cysts from my ovaries removed. So my immune system has been compromised a lot over the years from a very young age. So around the age of 16, I got Bell's palsy for the first time. At the age of 30, I got Bell's palsy for the second time. I've had trigeminal neuralgia twice now, which is Bell's palsy and trigeminal neuralgia are affected by the cranial nerves by the side of the face, and they affect your forehead, your cheekbone, and your jaw, any area. Bell's palsy specifically numbs the area, and the trigeminal neuralgia causes intense flare ups of pain. So I've dealt with that. And in 2002, I was very unfortunate to be, begins with the letter R, by a person who did wrong by me, went through a court case, sent that person to jail, and then proceeded to deal with 10 years of PTSD. So, as you can imagine from everything I've explained to you, I've had a very stressful life. I've also had shingles, and I've also had multiple surgeries. I got diagnosed with many conditions over the years. As I've said, Bell's palsy, diagnosed with a condition called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder, but it also turns out that it also means you're highly sensitive to noise, to touch, to smell, to taste. All these things I am very sensitive to, and having the PTSD that I did even heightened that sensitivity even more. So people were diagnosing me with these things. I was also diagnosed with PCOS by a gynecologist and a bicornuate uterus. So supposedly I'm less likely to get carry a baby to full term if I were to get pregnant, and the chances of getting pregnant because I had PCOS were less likely. So all the things I had been given were negative. Rheumatologists offered to put me on steroids to relieve my pain because I have arthritis in multiple joints because I'm a physio. So lots and lots going on. And I got to the stage where I decided I'd had enough of different ologists, so to speak, and functional medicine doctors telling me that it is what it is. You just have to live with these conditions. And it's like the rheumatologist actually said, no word of a lie, actually said to me that this condition won't kill you, it'll just give you a miserable life. So that was my why. That's when I started investigating there must be something different. And to have the concussions I had and to have the PTSD, I ended up finding out in a roundabout way about a gentleman called Dr. Michael Lewis, who specializes in concussions in America. He's ex-military doctor and now specializes in concussions. And I did his protocol, and I actually contacted him as well, and he was very obliging. And basically, he got me to take 27 omega-3 tablets a day for 2 weeks. And then after 2 weeks, I dropped by half every week until I was down to 4 tablets. And what I found fascinating was in the space of a week, I had become much calmer, less agitated, less stressed, less anxiety. And I found that fascinating just by taking these tablets. And yes, there's a lot of them, but it blew my mind. So from there, I found out about the movie First Do No Harm with Meryl Streep. And if you don't know that movie, it's a must-see with regards to the ketogenic diet. It's about a young boy who had epilepsy. I believe it's Meryl Streep's, one of her head producers' son that was actually had the condition. So she agreed to be in that movie. But this long story short, he was having epileptic fits. They were getting worse. The consultants wanted to take part of his brain away, and the parents kidnapped him essentially from the hospital and brought him to a place where they could get a ketogenic diet. And his fits, epilepsy, just dropped right down. And I believe he's only had about 10 ever since. So that was inspiring to me, and it made me think, do you know what, this ketogenic diet is absolutely fascinating and something I need to pursue. So I started it in 2010, and I went all in. And I did that until 2018. And in 2018, I had an experience where I have an addictive personality, and I'm okay with that. I now admit to it. But I was having, with ketogenic diet, you can eat as much as you want of anything as long as it's high fat. So one day in May 2018, I had, I think it was 500 grams or a kilo of macadamia nuts because they're high fat. And I got so frustrated with myself. I'd heard about the carnivore diet. I'd heard about how beneficial it was to lots of Kelly Hogan. Sean Baker spoke about it a lot. So after literally the same day as taking the macadamia nuts, I was so upset with myself. I went out and bought a load of ribeye steaks and butter, and I went all in carnivore. And what was fascinating about this, I did well with the ketogenic diet, but with the carnivore diet, I lost my period for the first 3 months. And then after 3 months, it came back. Now, the importance of this is because I had PCOS, the longest my period ever was 7 weeks. I've had 2 weeks on and a week off and 2 weeks on again. It's been all over the place for a very long time. So in May 2018, it disappeared for 3 months, and then it came back, and it's been like clockwork ever since. 26 to 28 days for 4 days only on. And that's just, Stephen, that's phenomenal to me. Like, that makes me think the PCOS has settled down when someone said you just have to live with it. So I've been doing all this research, I've been doing all this eating, and I did really well on the carnivore diet. And then over time, I realized that if I eat 2 steaks, I start to get agitated and stressed. And I started doing more investigating because some people thrive in this way of eating, but some of us have to learn from our mistakes. And I realized over time that if I have 2 ribeye steaks, I fall out of ketosis. And ketogenic diet is very important to me. So I do the carnivore version of the ketogenic diet, so high fat and meat. But if I have 1 ribeye steak, I never get out of ketosis. So that became quite important for me. And I ran with that for quite a while. But another thing I did, which was very silly, but again, it's part of this space, I went out of my way to find a Facebook group that allowed dark chocolate on the carnivore diet, which was very silly, but I knew dark chocolate and I knew coffee were things that some people would eat. And what I realized is I have a huge addiction to dark chocolate, which I've learned from Bitten Johnson. And it really, really shocked me that people say, "Oh, just have a piece and you'll be fine." And that's when I learned a lot about moderators and abstainers, and that I'm an absolute abstainer. But I was constantly looking for outs that I could treat myself to different things. But over time, I've learned the best diet for me is the likes of sardines and cod livers with oil, the likes of ribeye steaks are my staple diet, and bone marrow and pemmican. I make a lot of pemmican. I think that's absolutely fantastic for people to try. And over time, I've gotten to a place where I feel really, really good. All my symptoms have settled. The conditions with the Ehlers-Danlos syndrome are way more manageable. I was diagnosed with POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome,
Yeah.
and that settled with the use of salt on this way of eating. So everything settled. However, every time I add dark chocolate back in or I eat too much meat, my symptoms come back, except for the periods. Everything else can get messed up. So that's, for me, that's why I really, really love this space, and I like looking after clients. I've got a Facebook, not a Facebook, a Zoom group. I've got a WhatsApp group, and I do one-to-ones because I know what it's like to hear that just eat the meat. Really simple, really straightforward. And I know you interviewed Lisa Wiedemann, and she's a lovely person, and she's the same. It's not simply just eat the meat. We can't all just eat from the animal kingdom. It doesn't work for all of us. So I tend to work with people that struggle with the experiences of it's not working for me, or I'm not doing it right, or it's too difficult. It's like, no, no, no. You have to find what works for you and how it works for you. So, so I hope that's answered all your questions.
Yeah, well, that did. Well, yes, I mean, that is a huge introduction. Obviously, there's lots. Well, to be honest, in 10 minutes there, you packed a lot in, and I think you could just pick one subject to talk about it for an hour because, to be honest, Heather, I don't know you well enough, and I try to keep my interviews real. So I'm sitting there gulping, thinking, well, I didn't know that. That sounds horrendous. And I don't want to get too bleak because we could go down some big routes here, I think. But I think, some of the things that you've been through, the first thing about a practitioner is empathy. And,
Mhm.
one of the things that surprises me still is if I talk about my, not lapses so much, but, weaknesses like dark chocolate or something like that, people are very surprised. Even this. So I'll have a sip of lime water and people will pick me up and say, what about the fructose? And I think these little glib things like, you can't have too much meat is actually quite damaging because you could flip that round and say, so you're saying to ignore your satiety signals? Don't you want your leptin to actually work? I mean, one thing we've got in common, we've both got dogs. My dog is raw meat carnivore and he doesn't eat everything we put down. Simple as that. And people that don't have that way of eating for their pets can't believe that a dog can be very casual about what they eat and walk away when there's food on the plate. And I'm thinking, actually, that's what an animal would do in the wild, because if they're overweight, they can be predated on. The balance in the wild is to be where you should be. Now, you used the phrase, and it's one of my. I'm not knocking you. It's the phrase that people use: too much meat. Well, too much of anything, isn't it? Too much of anything is bad. Too much water is
Mhm.
bad. So when someone says, you know, just eat and eat and eat and don't worry, well, you're actually setting yourself up to fail, because you need a certain amount of amino acids, you need a certain amount of fats. You can gain weight on carnivore. You can gain weight any way you eat. You can make yourself sick with too much water. So I think that was really interesting that you got to the point where you were listening to influencers and realized that it's a bit more nuanced than that. And that's not knocking any influencers out there, but it's just, it is, eat this amount, and well, that might not suit some other people. And also the type of meat. Beef is very good, but both myself and Richard Smith, who's speaking at your conference, which we'll talk about later, we're big advocates of lamb, especially in the UK, because its amino acid profile is probably a little bit superior to beef. Maybe that's because we're in the UK and there is a lot of sheep. So is that our epigenetics? So anyway, right, let's get back to you. I want to nail one thing, right? Because you mentioned some things like Reiki and breath work, which to some viewers might be woo woo, and I've suffered that as well, because I do medical acupuncture, or I did in my past with when I was doing rehab face to face. What would you say to people about breath work, for instance?
It's funny. I think I teach different types of yoga, and at the beginning of each class, I get people to focus on the breathing. And my favorite line is, breathe in through your nose and out through your nose, because your nose is for breathing and your mouth is for eating. And I really do like that line, because nobody can really challenge that line. You can use like Wim Hof's version of intense breathing, and there's no problem with that. But day to day, nobody should hear you breathing. You should not be breathing through your mouth. There's a fantastic book called Breathe by James Nestor that I highly recommend people read. And also the person who I've done my training with, which is Patrick McEwen. Because ultimately, it's about using your breath properly. And if you can inhale through your nose and exhale through your nose without issues, then you're doing phenomenally well, because your nose is designed to help you take air in and back out. So it's so simple, it's so basic. And for people to say, "Oh, for goodness sakes, everyone can breathe," it's like, no, you shouldn't snore at night. You shouldn't have a dry mouth at night. You shouldn't have a glass of water by the bed every night. These are really simple things, but we've forgotten them. And why have we forgotten them? Because we're stressed, because we're eating too late at night, because we have gotten into a habit. It's there's lots of reasons for it, but the very basic thing I will say is, can you hold your nose, exhale, hold your nose, and hold it comfortably for 25 to 30 seconds without any desire to breathe? And if you can do that, you're doing fantastic. But if you have to take your fingers away from your nose really quickly or open your mouth within seconds, then you're a dysfunctional breather. And that was a huge, when I started normal breathing, which not many people do, I only lasted 5 seconds of holding my nose, and I was mortified. But I've had major trauma in my life, so my anxiety is quite high. And I was diagnosed with breathing affective disorder by a breathing pattern disorder by a pulmonologist a few years ago. And he said, the reason I have the breathing issues is because of all the stress and trauma I've had in my life. And I think there's very few people in this world that have a perfectly easy life. So you have to give yourself that opportunity to research breath work. Ideally, read James Nestor's book or go, listen to podcasts, because it's so important, and it can calm you right down. Even something as simple as taping your mouth shut at night, that actually reduces your blood pressure. Very, very simple, and it gives you a better night's sleep.
Yes, and breathing is so fundamental, isn't it? It's just,
Absolutely.
it's so essential for your gaseous exchange. If people want to get all sciencey,
Nice.
um, it's just so obvious that if your breathing is dysfunctional for whatever reason,
Mhm.
people have lost their sense of smell, for instance. It ruins their life.
Mhm.
Absolutely ruins their life, and they don't realise that smell has such a big impact on, say, taste and appreciation of things that are going on. So, I think breath work isn't woo-woo. I think it's really important. If anyone's had their blood pressure, there's two things actually. When people have their blood pressure taken in a hospital setting or at their doctors, there's two things. When I said about too much water, well, water puts your blood pressure up if you drink too much. But if it's low, and Heather's going to demonstrate, if your blood pressure is low, the nurse or the doctor will say, could you have a small glass of water, and we'll take your pressure again, because they know it will put it up. And it's just, the other thing is, if your blood pressure is high, they will ask you to do some deep breathing. So there's your science in
Mhm.
day-to-day practical environments. Everybody knows that's trained in this that breathing can bring your blood pressure down. Drinking too much water can put your blood pressure up. So there's two things that might sound woo-woo. You could go to any doctor or nurse and say, if this was the situation, what would you do? And they would do those two things, or should know those two things. Anyway, right. I just wanted to get the woo-woo thing out of the way, because it was a bane of my life when I was talking about
Well,
acupuncture, even though it
the,
works.
there is another thing really quickly. There's two things that I used to ask doctors about all the time, and the pulmonologist. If I walk upstairs, bearing in mind I'm an athlete, I get out of breath and my legs get very heavy. And I always found that amazing, and nobody could answer it. And it's because I'm not oxygenating efficiently. But the other one is I sigh when I'm stressed. And it's because I can't tolerate carbon dioxide in my body. So I'm trying to release it. And again, these are really basic, simple things. But if you sigh or you get out of breath walking upstairs when you're quite active and fit, then the chances are you have a breathing pattern issue. And doing the likes of research into as I said, James Nestor or Patrick McEwen, will be very insightful for you.
Yes. So I think this is anyway. Let's move on, shall we? Because I don't want to cover the woo woo bit too much. You mentioned about tissue disorders actually, and this seems to
Connective.
be yeah. This seems to be more prevalent than I realised when I started this 15 years ago. So why do you think that is? Do you think that's solely based on nutrition, or is there other things at
Well,
play?
they say that Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is genetic, supposedly, and it's interesting. I think most people just never knew about it. In the NHS now, it is regarded as a condition, and you do see the rheumatologist, and you do get the definitive diagnosis, and it's part of the Bainton score for hypermobility. Is a test that physios do and the consultants do to check where you score on that. If it's 9 out of 9, is you're hypermobile. Anything from 5 above, you are hypermobile. So it's always been a thing out there, but I think it's getting more attention now. Like I know, and this is fascinating, through my physio, I've been able to tell people that have Ehlers-Danlos syndrome because I got diagnosed with it, and I was the only person who was able to tell them, and they've been looking for years for a diagnosis, but nobody knows enough about it. So I think that's why it's been hidden. It's like, and it's probably contentious. It's like fibromyalgia. If we can't diagnose you, we'll just decide that you have fibromyalgia. And again, do people actually have that? We can go down that road. It's such a long, winding road. But ultimately, I think it's been around a long time, but it's now becoming such a problem because of our diet. I definitely learned, and I said this in the presentation last week, that insulin resistance causes your Ehlers-Danlos syndrome to actually worsen. It causes your symptoms to be worse, which I didn't realize. And that really surprised me. If you look into the research, if you had Ehlers-Danlos, sugar is of no benefit to you. So again, is it our diet? Is it environmental? We're sitting more. We're not looking after our bodies as much. For me, I do a lot of strengthening for my shoulders and my hips because being hypermobile, you want those main areas to be strong and my core. So yeah, for me, I really think it's probably been around because it's genetic, but we're becoming more aware of it now because people's symptoms are getting worse and worse.
Yeah, definitely. So a very broad question now then. Mental health. That's the phrase. That's the buzzword. I was very lucky to have Dr. Rachel Brown on recently, and I asked her the same question, and I did ask Dr. Georgia Eade the same question. So Heather, what actually is mental health? Why are we bothered about mental health?
Well, I can only answer for me, and I'm not even going to pretend to be able to answer that question as a whole. But from my perspective, I have suffered major anxiety. To this day, if you come up behind me unexpectedly, I will jump, and it stresses my body out still since what I've been through in my life. But I used to scream if the phone rang. I used to uber anxious and uber stressed really, really quickly. I was highly reactive. And when I went to eating a high fat diet, all these symptoms settled down. And for me, mental health is that when I eat dark chocolate or I eat too much meat, I bring on all my symptoms again. So it's worsening my mental health. But to help me and to make sure my mental health is on track, I know the foods to eat because for me, food is very, very important. The right food is very, very important for my mental health. I think it's such a complicated thing to explain. It's easier just to explain from my experience.
Yes. So because it's so vast, you see, that's the thing, and it is not really, objective, is it? I mean, it's quite ethereal, some of it. And the next question will lead on to this, but testing. Is there any tests that you do when someone comes in? Is there blood tests that could help you with diagnosis, or is it all pretty much sort of face to face and looking at symptoms?
So again, from my perspective, I don't test people. I did a few in the beginning, and then I've done lots and lots and lots of tests for myself. I've spent thousands of pounds privately getting all these tests under the sun, and I've proven to be super healthy and super fit, and nothing's wrong with me. Yet I have all these problems. So I think people will get results back and they'll find out they're fine, or as we've had these discussions, Stephen, you and I, about the fact that your bloods are wrong and they're really high or they're really low. And it's like, well, actually, relative to your diet, are they? So I'm not someone who gets bloods anymore. And if I had someone come to me who had the bloods done, I would actually send them your way.
Yes, yes, and we're definitely on the same page with that, because testing is somebody else's opinion. It's very arbitrary, and it's not the person. It's not designed. We wouldn't look at. So let's say we both went out for a run and we looked at our 100-meter sprinting time, yourself and myself, and then we compared it to under 18 100-meter champions, and thought, well, we're both dismal failures, aren't we? We're both very slow, because it's not the right reference chart to look at. So it's so obvious to me, all of that. Anyway, let's talk about something that's happening in a couple of weeks' time, because this is a big deal, isn't it? You've got something happening in Manchester. So could you just tell us a little bit about this event?
Yes, thank you. So on the 19th of October, we're having, my partner and I, Ben Hunt, are hosting a conference in Manchester at a beautiful monastery for the Keto Brain Health. It's the first ever conference of its kind, because there is the public health collaboration, which specifically deals with academics and trying to bring the research to the NHS and to the medical specialists. We're trying to bring it to the layperson. What I've found over the years, and I don't know if you're the same, Stephen, is a lot of people say to me, everyone says keto is dangerous. It's a fad diet. It's a weight loss diet. It's going to kill me, cholesterol, heart disease, you name it. And I get so frustrated with that. And I think if people really got to sit and listen to some phenomenal speakers, they'd understand that it's actually really simple and straightforward. They just don't have the knowledge. So I had a long chat with my partner at the time a few months ago, and he said, look, you've got this vision. You've been wanting to help people for a long time. So why don't we put this together? And because he's great at marketing, he's working his butt off to do that side of it. But I'm literally wanting to bring to the layperson, these are fantastic speakers. I'll go through them in a second. But ultimately, they're there to talk to you from a very basic point of view. They're not talking about pathways or algorithms, etc. They're purely talking about the basics of certain drugs, certain fats, what ketosis is. And I want people to go away with tips that they can use straight away in their life, and that they can explain to family or friends. So the speakers we have are, first off, Zoe Harcombe. I don't know if anyone knows Zoe Harcombe, but she was very integral in Professor Tim Noakes's court hearing a few years ago. She is extremely good in the space of fat, and you should check her out in her podcasts. She's going to be talking about fat and the myths with regards to fat. And then we have Dr. Rachel Brown, who is a metabolic psychiatrist who you said you've already interviewed. I think she is a fantastic person to have in this space, and she's already doing an amazing job. From there, we have Richard Smith, Keto Pro, who's a friend of both of ours. He is going to talk about ketosis and addictions, which I think is really important. Then we have Ira Cummins, who will speak to us about medication, specifically statins, and the link to mental health, and kind of put that to bed, because a lot of people have questions about that. And he's an engineer by trade, and he's just fantastic. So he researches the end degree and is the person to listen to. And finally, we have Anthony Chafee, Dr. Anthony Chafee, who will be discussing from a neurosurgeon registrar point of view his comments on the day, and all five of them will also be answered questions in a panel at the end of the day. At lunch, just before lunch, we will have a panel specifically with people that have actually made massive inroads in their health by doing a ketogenic way of eating. It is what I find really interesting is, just going on a side, I call my way of eating ketovore. And a lot of people in the carnivore space think ketovore is green vegetables, avocados, olives, etc. To me, ketovore is a high-fat carnivore diet. So I prioritize my fats and then I add my protein. I always get, for me, I think Bronson, Coach Bronson, I think his name is, in
Yes.
America. I think he's got a great gram for gram. So if you're 150 pounds, you're 150 grams protein a day. I really stick with that, and I find that helps. And I usually eat twice a day, but I do it from a ketovore point of view. So a few of us will be coming from the carnivore way of eating and giving our journeys relative to being in ketosis and the benefits it had whilst we're eating this way of eating. So yeah, all in, there's quite a few of us there. All the speakers, I've reached out to all the speakers bar two. Sorry, Ben got two, and I approached the others, and everybody's so humble, so obliging. They are you will just thoroughly enjoy being in their company. They're not people that hide away, so it would be lovely to see people there and get to experience face to face with these people, so these speakers. So yes, thank you.
Yeah, what a lineup. It's a fabulous lineup, and I'll put a link in the description. Obviously, this is evergreen, so you might miss it. What is the date? It's 2024. When's the conference
It's
on?
the 19th of October, so Saturday the 19th.
Excellent. And if you use the code UK Carnivore, or one word, then you will get a discount on the ticket. So I'll put the link in the description. So Heather, thank you so much for being my guest today.
Thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed.